Want to learn how to animate a $9 skeleton from Amazon?
Actually, I am kind of lonely.
Oh, Bones, I'm sorry you're lonely. Let's make you a buddy.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Great. We'll make a professional style mech puppet based on a video by Adam Kreutinger. Link in the description below to see the original. In his video, Adam uses a larger skeleton to create this puppet. We're going to use a smaller one that has screws in the back of the head for easy access. This will make it easier to put the spring in for the mech. To help you out, I've created schematics and directions that are available on my website. Go to www.liveactionpuppets.com to download your schematics, materials list, and directions. Then you will have an assistance for when you're building. This YouTube video will give you visual directions to help you along the way. Let's get started. For this puppet build, you're going to need a $9 Amazon skeleton, 5/8 inch dowel rod, 2mm wire. This is insulation support wire. 5/32 steel rod, 1/8 outer diameter poly tube or Teflon tube. You'll need landing gear straps with associated hardware, very tiny screw eyes, 3/32 Dura collars, number 3 plastic washers, an extension spring. The exact dimensions are listed in the material sheet. A 5/8 inch screw. You can use just about any screw you have laying around, so as long as it's a thin one, that's not too long so that it would penetrate through the entire dowel rod handle. You also need 1 inch by 1 inch Delin rod that's been sliced 1/2 inch thick. You'll need a little gaffer tape or something to just tack down the end of your poly line. You could use something besides gaffer tape, so maybe a different kind of tape. You'll also need some string. It's about 2 to 3 millimeters of this elastic cord. Mine is kind of a round, soft, thin cord. I believe it's like COVID mask cord. Preferably, if you could get it in beige, that would be lovely because it would show less on the skeleton. I only had it in black, so I used black. Same with this string. This string is only if you want to restring something on your skeleton. So if you wanted to restring your elbow joints, you could use this, perhaps the shoulder joints. I believe I did my shoulder joints with this as well. You'll also need Dacron fishing line to go through the poly tube. That's part of the trigger mechanism for the mouth. You'll need some sandpaper. Sandpaper, or preferably there's like more powerful tools. So the Dremel sander with a drum bit, either the smaller, skinnier one or the thicker drum bit will do. That's for sanding in the thumb rest on the Delin. It's good to sand these edges smooth, so I use my belt sander to get those edges. That's a little faster than the sandpaper. For the spring, you can use a wire cutter, but for these different, oh, and you can also use the wire cutter for the 2mm. Cutting this, you'll need like a jigsaw like I used. I rotated it around on the jigsaw to score all the way around and cut through part way, and then I could snap it off. And I didn't have it out here, but a number 11 crafted blade is nice for cutting things like this or for cutting cord. Gluing in the steel rod, 5-minute epoxy. Usually these Duracolors come with an Allen wrench, and that's Allen wrench, you'd need that. You'll also need some drill bits. I have a couple different sizes. They're listed in the directions. You'll need a 3/32 inch, a 5/32, a 1/8, a 5/16, or a 3/8, and a 1/16. You'll also need these 3D printed parts, but they're actually optional. So there's a way or workaround if you don't have a 3D printer. The base is just nice for standing your puppet up. So for instance, this guy is in a base. It actually makes it easier to display and puppeteer. But you could either do a piece of plywood and drill up into the dowel rod to create the same scenario. And for the trigger, you could use the same shape but cut out of plastic. I printed a to scale version of what this looks like, and you could cut it out of plastic, preferably thicker. So if it's a 1/4 inch thick, that would be lovely. But if all you have is something thinner, I would try that. These schematics will be really, really helpful. These are available on my website. It's going to have a diagram of the puppet, including where all the different hardware and pieces are located. There's also a materials list so you know exactly what skeleton to get for this to work. This particular skeleton, if you take it out of the bag, we'll take a peek here. If you can't find this at the time that you view this particular episode, it needs to have an articulating jaw. The one on this one is a little stiff, so we'll be drilling out the hinge hole. But that is necessary to make a talking skeleton. This one also has a head back that comes off with screws. That makes it easier to install the mech. Adam Kreutinger's video, which first featured this demo, this particular build, he had a different kind of head that was actually probably a little harder to work with, but he cut it open with a craft knife. So if for some reason you got a skeleton that didn't have easy access with the screws pulling the head back off, you can refer to his video for another way to tackle that particular problem. One of the first steps you're going to do is you're going to take this skeleton apart. I forgot to add this to the materials list, but you're going to need a screwdriver that can get to those screws at the back of the head. This is a little jeweler's size screwdriver, so it'll fit into these tiny little holes. Once you open up the back of the head, this little piece of cord you can toss. You need to make this jaw articulate a little bit better. Right now it's stiff. It's not going to have good return. Your spring just doesn't have the energy to overcome that friction. So we're actually going to pull the jaw off. And the way I do it is I pull it off one hinge point, and then I remove it, leaving the hinge in the jaw portion so that you have the skull left by itself. So the drill point the area we're gonna drill out is this hole, and that's so that pin can pivot in there a little bit easier. So the drill bit I'm gonna use is this 3/32 one. It just happens to look about the right size, and that one was already on my list. So I didn't even put it in my drill. I'm just fingering it through like a pin drill or a twist drill, just to widen up that hole. And then we'll put the jaw back in and see if it rotates a little bit better. A little tricksy. There we go. See how loose that is? It's perfect now. The next thing is we're going to drill some holes through the spine. We need polytube that goes through there, and we need cord that goes through there. So you're going to use a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill through that hole. And I forgot to mention that a drill is necessary, but it is. I took a moment to get out all my drill bits for this project. You'll need 5. This largest one can be kind of variable. It's going to be drilled through this bottom jaw area to create an access point for the Dacron line. And I have listed either 2 options, 3/8 or 5/16. The 3/8 is more common, but if you feel that drill bit's too large, you could go down. I'm going to use 3/8. Just a tool tip plus also an inquiry from you. What happens is I have this box of drill bits right here, and so when it came time for me to find the drill bits for this particular project, I ended up using something called a drill gauge, and the best price I found on Amazon. It's a metal gauge as opposed to a plastic one, because I have a plastic one too that has that's not quite as good as this one, but you can put in your drill bit through the different holes to figure out what size it is if you can't read the sizing on the bit itself. So it took me a while to find my 5 drill bits, but I was able to find them because I have this drill guide. My question to you as a fellow builder is, do you have a good way for organizing drill bits? Because my drill bits are a mess. So I really need a box. I have those like clamshell kind of like things from like DeWalt that I put my drill bits in. But after a while, I can't figure out how those things go in, and I have odd sizes. So any tips you have would be appreciated. Okay, step 1, we're gonna drill through the spine area, and we're gonna use our 1/8 drill bit. This one's particularly long. It's because I couldn't find my short one that I'm going to use this extended bit. There's 2 different directions we need to drill. So we're going to drill down the spine this direction, and we're going to also drill from the back to the front. And your diagram will actually give you a little picture on the angle that you need to go. So straight down is easy enough to understand, but the angle for the neck is going to be going kind of angling up towards the chin, through the back up towards the chin. And you need that angle because we want the poly tube to be a gentle bend from this direction down straight. A gentle bend is possible. Since the string starts from up here, goes down, we want it to gently bend through the spine and come down the back. So instead of going straight through, which creates a more sharp angle, we're going to angle it a little bit up towards the chin. So for safety purposes, I'm going to throw this puppy in the vise, and maybe I can take you over there. So I'm going to make it a little less dangerous, I'm going to go ahead and put this skeleton in the vise. Then I can control my drill bit just a little bit better. And a hot tip from John Little is when you put if your drill's got a bit in it, to lay it down on its side. See, if you lay it like this, it's more likely to cause an accident. I've broken bits because it tips over and then it shatters the bit. So this is down from top down. I don't know if it punched through the front or not. It did not. Okay, so that's straight down. The other one is going to angle up towards the chin, like this direction. The exit point needs to be close to coming up right above the top of his clavicle right here, barely visible. So, and from the back, it's about into the 5th vertebrae, it looks like, with the head still attached. Is that the same on here? Yeah, it's about the 5th vertebrae. So I'm going to aim for right about here, towards right above the clavicle. So 5th vertebrae. Sounds macabre if I say it that way, but it's just a plastic toy. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's easier to get it between the vertebrae. And if it's hard to get a start, you can use the punch and see if that helps. Or you could use a twist drill and make a little tiny pilot. It wants to rotate out. I'm going to make a little tiny pilot. So I'm just taking my 3/32 bit and I'm going to just twist it by hand just to make a little divot. So my drill bit will bite. Okay. There we go. I called it punch through the front. Let's hope it came out in the right spot. I think that's going to be close enough. I'm going to shove my poly tooth through the hole to see where it comes out. That'll do. Comes out right above the clavicle. And then hopefully, my hope is that the drill bit, the hole going this way and the hole going through this way will intersect. I think I can see it. See if I can see it through the back hole. Yep, they intersect because we want the black cording to go from here out this hole, and we want the poly tubing to go out through that above clavicle hole, out the same hole in the back. So successfully did that. The next hole we're going to drill is going to be down the bottom of the spine. So I already put my next skeleton. He's upside down. See, his legs are right here. We're going to go from the bottom of the spine up, and this is where your steel rod is going in. We're also going to put the same size hole, the 3/32 in the dowel rod, because the same steel rod is also going to go in the dowel rod. Plastic kind of melted to my bit. I sometimes take my splinter pliers to clean off my bit might be a little hot, so it's handy to use a tool. There we go. I'm going to check to see if my rod fits down that hole. It could be it needs to be reamed out. It does, because the plastic remelted a little bit. Yep, that's better. And I'm going to probably go down, I think I went up maybe 1.5 inches down the spine. So let's see if I got down further. Yeah, I went down a little farther. Yep, that's plenty. Now the dowel rod, I prefer to put the hole slightly off center because it gives me more room for my screw for the trigger. So unlike my rod, I don't have a jig for this particular size. My dowel rod jig is for a smaller dowel rod. So I'm gonna have to eyeball this one, and if I'm wrong, I'll have to redo it. You could use a smaller dowel rod. I think 1/2 inch is my normal size I use for rod handles. It just gives you less space for the trigger, and so I upped the size of the dowel rod in order to accommodate the trigger, actually the screw for the trigger. So I'm going slightly off center. You probably can't see it in here. I think I'll change my angle so you can see a little bit better. That it's not quite to center. It's off center. I didn't blow out the side. I'm happy about that. Okay. Test to make sure my rod goes down smooth. If it's a little tight, you can ream it out a little bit because you need a little room for epoxy. To hand sand this a little bit better, this little neck top, I'm going to use the sanding block. So I actually make these. You can buy these like at the hardware store, sanding blocks for usually in their painting department. I think I just did that to save money. The ones at the store are just as good. My goal is to get that round. So this is, if you were to watch Adam Kreutinger's skeleton mech video, he uses a Delin bead. And I looked up the prices and quantity and all that for Delin beads, and actually didn't need to order from McMaster, so I hesitated from buying them, especially since I get like 50 or 100 of these beads that I had no idea what I was going to use the rest of them for. So I thought, why don't we design it a different way? And so my neck pivot's going to be slightly different from his. In fact, there's 2 different ways that I've done it. Bones actually has a slightly different design than this new guy. So my friend Catherine, when she came, we did this design and it gave her more head motion than my original. So we're gonna do this for skeleton number 2 and see if we can't get more up and down yes motion out of this puppet than what Bones has. Basically, we want this to be able to rotate on top. It's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to have to drill out, what was that, 1/8 of an inch? Remount that a little bit. I might have melted that hole shut just a little bit. Actually, this cord is going to be what goes through this neck top, and then threaded through here. Let's see if we can get it through easily. I can see it coming. I can see it out this hole now. Now to get it, a couple different tricks here. To fish that line out, because now it's not going to want to come out at an angle without a little encouragement. There's a couple ways to do it. That pin is not working. Locking calipers might. See if we can grab it. Option 3, spaghetti straps turner. It's got a little loop on the front. This is to turn like little tiny tubes of fabric. It's a sewing tool. Ah! That was almost blind luck right there. We won't need a lot of this cord in order to do what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off just a small bit. Oh, maybe we'll call it 4 inches. Oh, wouldn't you know, I just pulled it right out of the hole. Okay. I did cut it though. Actually needs to go through here. In fact, I'll knot it. To knot it, I'm going to make sure I'm under camera here. So in order to knot this, to make it really, really thick and big, I'm not going to send the loose end through the knot once, but I'm going to send it at least twice. Let's see how big that is. That's pretty thick. We don't want it to escape down that hole. We want it to stay put. Yeah, that's pretty good. There we go. Grabbed it. So we're going to knot this up tight so that we get a little bit of movement on the neck in whatever direction we want, but it should be fairly tight. So I'm going to make that knot as tight as I can. The only other thing that has to go through that hole is the poly tube. So I'm going to quick get that. So we want to make sure there's enough space for the poly tube to go through. There is. In fact, I'm going to put it through and I'm going to knot in front of that, because this poly tube will help that knot from escaping down the hole. I'm going to wrap that loose end through the loop of my knot several times, and then hold tension on the line and put that knot as close to the poly tube as possible. We want that to be pretty firm. If it's too loosey-goosey, the head is going to tip over a little too easily. So I think that's pretty good. Just to be sure, I might give one more knot. So on the first prototype bones, I actually, instead of doing this elastic thing, I kind of just dremeled below the head attachment. There's like, it's almost square shape where the head attachment is. And I dremeled a circular shape below that, and I just didn't get as much pivot. So this is a workaround for that. So I think that's going to work better. Now, since this is polytube, glue is not going to keep it in place very well, which is why I have landing gear as an option for screwing this down. Mechanical attachments is what you have to do for polytubes. Since by nature, or excuse me, Teflon tubes, by nature, they're not supposed to let anything stick to them. So you have to do screws. So that landing gear is going to go just a little bit below the exit hole. Let's see it on bones here. Can you see it on bones? There you see it on bones. Looks like it's, I got the third rib. That's where this guy is. Since it's such an odd spot to drill, I'm going to go ahead and take my drill bit. This is one of the smaller ones. And then I'm going to go ahead and use it like a twist drill to start a pilot hole for the screws for the landing gear. Is it tricky? Yes, it is. There, I started it. And since it's not in the vise, use care when drilling this. Keep your hands out of the way. The screwdriver I use, the jeweler screwdriver I use is to open the head, was also good for the landing gear straps. Get it started. So that polytube's down a little more than flat, but, or excuse me, the landing gear is actually bending towards the spine a little bit, but as long as it doesn't squash the polytube, we're good to go. In fact, we can cut a piece of that Dacron line and make sure it goes through. I never did measure how much we need, but I know it's going to be less than 36 inches. It's not a real long piece. So I can start to thread it just to test to make sure everything's going through. Make sure it can make that bend through the polytube. And it can. It's fine. That's nice and low friction. So we haven't put the steel rod in, but once the steel rod is in, you can tack that bottom edge of the polytube with just a little bit of tape. You could, in theory, put another landing gear strap here. I chose not to do that. Extension spring. So the extension spring that I'm using here is from McMaster Carr. This number is golden on the bag. It's going to be in the master list. If you don't get the right spring, you're not going to get the right action. You only need the tiniest bit, but it's sold in, the smallest is a 36-inch length. So you're actually going to have to cut it off. So in the directions, it says 18 millimeters. Yes, I use metric because it just makes more sense for something this small. You could go, that's an estimate, but basically clip it off with wire cutters. And you need little loops at the end, but in order to make the loops, I think I'll do this with a tiny jeweler plier. So like one of these. Is you're going to separate, actually fingernails are really good for this. Separate 1 or 2 loops off the top to create the attachment points. So right now, I need my readers on to see if I have it. Yep, that's 2 loops. So once I've grabbed it with my fingernail, I can take little pliers and tip it out so that there's a little loop at the top. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom because we need a loop on both ends. In fact, if you can separate out 1 loop instead of 2, 1 loop does better on the top end. Looks like I have 2. There we go. There's my top loop. That top loop is going to go through, it's actually going to go around this little plasticky bit. And since this plastic bit is quite a bit larger than the loop of the spring, I'm going to stretch out that top loop awkwardly so that it fits around this plastic section right here. And it's going to be the anchor point in the head. So that's the spring. Now the other end of the Dacron line needs to be attached to the end of the spring, but we have a few more steps. First, we need a hole in the bottom of the jaw so the Dacron line can go up the spine and through the bottom of the jaw. So I'm going to throw this in the vise a second. We're going to use our largest drill bit. This one is 3/8. To make it easier to drill, I took his jaw back off again because we're going to stick this in the vise to stabilize it so it'll be a little bit safer and easier to drill the hole. The hole's going to be on the bottom of his jaw right here, and we're going to center it kind of in that space behind his teeth. And say that hole's going to be right about here. We'll fill it in so you could see it. So quarter of an inch behind the teeth, let's say roughly. And since a little starting point in the middle would be handy, I'm going to use this drill bit that's handy to just twist in a little spot where my drill bit can bite. And I'll get that 3/8 drill bit. I'm going to look down it and make sure I don't take out too much material towards the front. I think that'll be fine. All right, I popped through. If anything, I almost need it go out clean. It broke a little bit, but it's still gonna work. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sand this edge right here, because if the Dacron line catches on any of this, it'll wear it out. So you could use sandpaper. I happen to have some round files. So I'm gonna hit the edges with the round file. Just get better access with the round file here. Okay, I think that's soft enough. It's not gonna pull on. It's not gonna rub on the line. And there's our hole in the bottom of the jaw. We need to create a tie-off point. Okay, there's two different ways to create a tie-off point in the jaw. If you watch Adam Kreutinger's, he actually drills 2 holes in the front of the jaw to create a tie-off point. But it just so happens my Dacron line is black. It's not clear or white. So the Dacron would show up. So I decided on bones that I wanted a little bar in the jaw for my tie-off to make it more invisible. And when Catherine and I did hers, that I just like epoxied that little bar in. She found that it fell off too easily. So I'm actually going to do it the way we did it on hers, which we're going to drill a little hole through here, and then we're going to put a little piece of that 2mm wire in there through the drill hole and epoxy in place. Then it's less likely to fall off. Here's that little piece of wire, insulation support wire. This will not work on this wire. A bolt cutter will work. I heard it hit the floor. Okay. This is going to nest kind of in here, but we're going to drill through the jaw so that it goes through and it's less likely to fall off. So the drill that I need, it might be bigger than this one. Let's try this one first. My furnace just kicked in, so it's going to be a little loud, but we're going to drill anyway. So I'm going to drill this hole. See if my wire fits in that hole. I think I need a larger bit. Let's try this 3/32. Yep, that'll do. Got the little jaw hole. Okay, now we're going to epoxy that little wire in place so that it'll stay put. I'm going to use just a little bit of putty and put it in place. You could use a little piece of tape. It just so happens my dad was a polymer chemist and he invented this particular putty. So I happen to have it in my drawer. We're going to do 2-part epoxy. That putty was actually developed as artificial horseshoe pitching clay for President Bush Sr., because he was into horseshoe pitching, and they wanted an indoor clay pit. So my dad worked for Polystar at the time and developed that artificial clay for President Bush Sr. That is legit one of my favorite inventions of his. My sister and I used to play with this putty. Get it in each other's hair. It was a mess, but it was so fun to play with. Anyway, I'm gonna put a little bit of putty, I'm gonna put a little bit of epoxy on those joins. To keep that bar in place. Got my epoxy on. Now I just wait 5 minutes. One of the things you can do while that epoxy is drying is to sand the edges of this Delrin. To do it, if you're going to do it on a power sander, have a nice tool to keep your fingers away from the belt sander. So this pliers comes in handy. For a little diagram on how it needs to be done, there's some in the directions on where the edges. Basically, you're going to smooth all of the edges and corners. We're also going to put a thumb rest in on the top edge. There's also 2 holes to drill. So if it's not clear as I'm doing it which directions the holes are going, reference this. So the 5/8 inch hole goes top to bottom and the 3/32 goes side to side. So this is the steel rod. So this is sliding up and down the rod that's going into the bottom of the skeleton. And the 3/32 is where the 2mm wire is going to come out of the side, go up and into the head and through the thumb screws. Time to sand the Delrin. I'm going to just do that off camera a second. So I'm going to do a little hand sanding on this as well. If you hit the belt sander and your sanding's a little awkward and the edges aren't even, actually doesn't matter. The sanding is just to make it comfortable for the puppeteer to soften the edges. It's not something that's visible to the audience in terms of aesthetics. And so it can be a tad awkward and uneven, but we do want it smooth so that it doesn't catch on anything or feel uncomfortable for the puppeteer. Now, if you don't have the Dremel to put in the thumb rest, you're going to have to contort your sandpaper to sand in a little thumb rest here. But I'm going to use my Dremel because it's so much faster. So it's going to be kind of like angled like this. So if this is riding up and down that rod, it's going to be that top corner. For this. Okay, I'm going to do some hand sanding on it too. Get it even softer. Yeah, that feels better. So that's where your thumb is going to rest. 5/32 hole goes here. It's going to be centered across from the thumb rest and a little bit from the edge. Again, my drill guide's going to help me out here. Yep, it's this one. My dad would teach me to take whatever object I was drilling, sight down the center of it, and then you can guesstimate the drill bit size. So we're going to drill the 5/32 hole opposite the thumb rest. Reference the diagram for a little rough, if you need to know exactly where that is. I don't know if my drill bit is dull, but it is not fast going through. To make sure that that rod slides, I'm going to bring it over. Because if it's not smooth, and it's not, it's a little stiff, I'm going to ream that hole out just a little bit more because it needs to ride really smooth. And then the other hole, the 3/32, goes the opposite orientation. It's actually going to go kind of through the past almost, there's the thumb rest area. It's going to go through the 1/2 inch thickness right about here. So put in the vise. Swap out my bit. Ooh, hot. Yep, that's easy. Okay, that piece is done. My Delin isn't sliding very well on this rod, so I decided I'm going to recut it. And since I was going to recut it, I thought I'd show you the block that it comes in. It's a 1 inch by 1 inch block, and it comes as a, I don't know, 12-inch length. I believe McMaster. I think this was too small. Well, two things. This is only about 3/8 inches thick, and my drill bit was dull, and so it drilled crooked. So I did a thicker block that is closer to the 1/2 inch, actually a little bigger than the previous. So I'm going to go through the exact same things that I did before with sanding the edges and drilling the holes, and hopefully that will slide better. Okay, I redid a new piece of Delin rod, and it's got really good slide action now. So one thing I noticed when I drilled this one, if this slips out of the vise like this and the drill bit like nicks the side, it makes an entry hole that's slightly askew and it catches on that little dip. So on this one, I actually accidentally did that. This hole has just a little bit of a side wiggle in it. That's going to totally throw it off. So I actually flipped it over, did the other side, then did this thumb rest in, tested it. Yep, works good. And now I'm going to go ahead and put that side hole in. Okay, I dry fitted this rod, the steel rod and wooden handle assembly into the spine. And just to let you know, this distance right here, if it's too long, might make for awkward controls. So I measured it. It's about 3.75 inches from the base of the spine to the top of the handle. The important thing is you need to be able to reach all your controls. So don't epoxy everything in yet, and before you've got this Delin piece in place. Because what you need is to have everything situated so that you can access the controls. So the thumb needs to go here, forefinger's going to hit the trigger. I know Catherine had hers a little longer, and for some reason the reach wasn't right with the trigger and the thumb rest. And part of that has to do with the length of the 2mm rod that we're going to stick in yet. So once you have that bent, it's possible you can have a longer length here. You just need a longer length rod because this is going to slide through here, take a bend, go up, and then go into some screw eyes into the back of the head. FYI, that Delin rod, our bar piece, I cut that in a chop saw. If I were to do this with my jigsaw, it's more likely I'd be inaccurate and it would take longer. So I actually went out into the garage and used the chop saw. We're going to start to do the Dacron line that goes into the head and put that together. I already pre-threaded it through the poly tube where we tested before. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to, so I had to put this little piece of wire in the jaw so that we have a tie-off point. And now the jaw needs to be inserted back into the top skull. I never fully removed the pin out of that. I just kind of unthread it. We still got good action there. Now that Dacron line is going to get tied off on that little join, that little bar that we glued into the head. And we're going to give ourselves about extra 3 inches before we actually tie a knot. And we're going to tie a square knot, which is a knot plus a knot. And on the second knot, I'm going to loop it through a couple times. Yep, it seems to stick. And then we're going to take the 3-inch section of the cord and then bring it up into the top of the skull. And then that is going to get tied to the bottom loop of the spring. And we want it tied tight enough so that spring is actually activated part way. So if it's not fully activated, you're not going to get good snap back. So this is actually a little tricky to tie because you have to have a little bit of a tension on it. So I'm going to do it looser at first, and then I have to move that knot down. I'm going to do a regular knot and then send it through the loop again. There's probably a name for that, and if I can figure it out, I will put it on screen. Oh, I know how I did it. Let's we're going to unhook that the spring, because that means we can tie it a little bit tighter without the spring activated, and then we'll reactivate it and put it on the top. So in fact, let's not thread it through the jaw yet. Let's give ourselves, and I think I wrote it down at one point, where there's actually not too terrible a lot of space between the knot in the jaw and the second knot on the bottom of the spring, and it's only about a ½ inch. So if I know that ahead of time, I can tie that knot right about in that spot. And then stretch the spring up into the top of the head. There we go. Yep, and that's about a ½ inch between the knot on the jaw and the knot on the bottom of the spring. And then I'm going to thread the spring into the hole in the bottom of the upper jaw, and then onto that. The top loop goes onto that top screw mount in the skull. Now, as I see that, there's not a lot of tension on that spring. I might have to retie it, because what we want to pull on the string and the snapback to be pretty snappy. So if that is not real snappy, and I think I'd like it a little snappier than that, then you can take off the spring and shorten it. So we're going to, I don't know, shorten it by, I don't know, 2 millimeters. Make a new loop. There, now there's a little tension on that, better tension on that spring. Let's test it. Okay, I'm gonna trim off this piece of Dacron because it's getting in the way of the test. Oh, that's right, it's coming from the neck area like this. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty good snapback. We're going to throw that on the body and send this Dacron line down, and then we can test it from the longer distance. Yep, I like that. We're going to stick with that. And I think the back of the head could go back on. I think we're done with that part. His head's a little wobbly. There's his jaw action. The head's wobbly, but we're going to stabilize it now with the screw eyes. So the placement on that is kind of almost between the screws at the bottom of the head, and you're going to need 2 of them. We need 2 spots between, roughly between the screws. We're going to put one there for the screw eyes. So I use these little tiny, these are such tiny, tiny drill bits. So this one's labeled 63. I've already broken or lost 61 and 60, or 62 and 61. They're so tiny. And then I can pre-drill little tiny holes. Okay. Then the screw eyes go in a little easier. They're very tiny. I think I bought these for miniatures. And if it's hard on your fingers, you can always use the pliers to turn. So I guess the jewelry pliers is kind of handy. So this wire is going to go in here. We're going to have a 3/32 Duracollar to keep this wire from falling through on this side. So the bend needs to be, if you use 1 Duracollar, the bend can go right here. If you wanted 2, the bend would need to go farther out. But with Bones, I did 1 here. Catherine did 2. So her bend was in a different spot. In fact, we'll see. I have a bending tool that's super duper handy. So I'm going to go show you that. So I bought this wire bending tool, Micromark. They had this in their catalog, but it's been out of stock for a while. So I found it at a locksmith store. It's really handy. So if I think of it, I'll have to put it in directions so you have a resource for that. Actually, I like it the other direction. Even though this wire is not super, super hard to bend, it's not like piano wire, this just makes it so much accurate and crisp and easier than bending my hand. So my photo stands in the way. You have to actually tighten down with an Allen wrench your wire under this black screw. And then you take this bar, your bend point, actually it's going to be a little farther past where I want it, so I might have to trim off the short end a little bit. But then you crank it, and now I can get a nice pretty 90-degree bend right there. Handy dandy. It does piano wire too. This wire might need to be a little bit shorter, but I kind of wanted to sand it anyway, so I'm going to just send it over the belt sander and make it so this is nice. Oh. Yeah, I think that shortened it enough. I don't even need to shorten it. So you're going to need this Duracollar, the 3/32. That gets threaded on after it goes through the screw eyes. Little Allen wrench that came with it. Hopefully I can find it on my table. It's getting a little messy here. So there's a little set screw in there, Duracollar, and the way you clamp down the Duracollar onto the wire is by turning the set screw. Okay, so that's on there. Now if I do my little dry fit down with the rod and the spine, I know that the other end of the wire has to make a turn, and I want this little Delin block about maybe 1/2 inch above the rod, which means my bend, if my head is level, needs to be right about here. So I'll mark that with the pen. Use the bend tool again to make that second bend. I guess that held it in place though. That second bend is actually needs to be in the same plane as this bend. So keep that in mind as you screw it down. So there's my little mark. And I think that'll about put it in the right spot. This needs to be level with the floor, this top bend, so the bends go in the same plane. This might need to go a little bit over 90 degrees. That's probably too much. And that's because the Delrin block is thicker than the distance between the screw eyes. So it's not perfect 90 degrees. Now we need this clipped off right about here. Enough space for second Duracollar. This is probably more space than I need. I could probably clip it off before then. So the bolt cutters come in handy here. I've got eyewear on, so if this flies, I'm good. Just be mindful that this flies. All right. That goes through there. Goes through there. Oh, there we go. Once the Duracollar's on, it'll be tighter. But I actually don't want the Duracollar on quite yet. I'm going to soften this edge. Make sure it doesn't catch. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So then I can thread it through here. Uses the same Duracollar size. Move this in here. There might need to be minor adjustments with angles and things to make sure the Delrin control and the head is actually facing the same direction. And then you can get, yeah, right now the head is slightly left. Twist it a little bit. Yeah, I'm getting good motion. I like it. Yeah, I think that's about right. I just want my thumb and his nose to kind of be in the same direction. So as I puppeteer, I can kind of know it is center, where face forward to audience is. Okay, that's pretty good. Next we need to do the trigger for the mouth. That's mounted on the handle. So in terms of orientation, I know the trigger is going to be, because I'm right-handed, it's going to be on the left-hand side. Okay, I cleaned off my desk so I could find the trigger, and I found it. It's a little bit rough, so I'm going to hit it with some sandpaper to smooth off the edges. Next to the build plate where the support material was, it's just a little bit sharp, so I'm going to sand that a little bit. The holes don't always print out perfectly, so you can also run a drill bit through the holes to make sure it punches all the way through. Now if I look at bones here, this is actually, I made this in Tinkercad, it's actually the candy cane shape. So the long end of the candy cane is going to be facing forward, and the trigger point where your forefinger is going to hit is actually going to be the small tip of the candy cane right here. So think of that as you're putting it on your skeleton. We're going to drill a hole through the thickest part of the wood. It's going to be centered on the dowel rod, but crossing through a section where it won't run into the steel rod, which is why I made the steel rod offset, so that when we drill for this trigger, it won't run into the steel rod. Since this is, let's see, I got this little tiny screw. I'm not exactly sure what bit is best, but this one looks like it would do. And this one is, according to my drill gauge, 1/16. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my drill. Put a little piece of wood here. Kind of close to the top. If I were to do it again, I'd probably put it a little bit farther down. Okay, so this goes this way. This is with the skeleton, assuming the skeleton is facing this direction. Then you would do the screw, Teflon washer, trigger, and then Teflon washer. And you know what? This hole needs to be bigger because we want this trigger to spin freely. So I'm going to do a larger drill bit. I only need to do it on this, the bottom of the J section, not on the top, because we're just a thread line on this side, but this one's going to be the pivot point. Now let's see if that screw is going to ride. Yep, that'll work. Now I can do washer, trigger, washer, and then into the dowel rod. This one uses an Allen wrench. That's it. We don't need this tight because we still want this to spin. So like right now, it's too tight. So I'm going to back it off. Yep. So this can dangle loosely. Get our skeleton limbs out of the way. We're going to tie off the Dacron line onto the trigger. It's going to go through the hole. See if it matters which side. I'm going to go to the far side because it's less likely to get interrupted by this Delin piece if it's coming from the outside angle. Now getting the tension on this is kind of going to have to play with it a little bit. Now none of this is epoxied in. We're going to probably do this so after we make sure that we can get the tension right on this. I just want to know my jaw has snapback, and it does. So, okay, we're not going to tie that off yet. Now we're going to epoxy everything together, and then we'll do the final tie off on the trigger. Now I can epoxy both ends. I'm just pulling a piece of trash, paper out of the trash. See if I have a Q-tip. I need to grab a Q-tip too. Equal parts of both. I think I'm just going to roll my rod in. Would have been smart to sand that. I think I'll sand the other end. Since the wood end is so tight, let's shove this in the wood end. And then put this in the spine. Now when I twist it, I want to kind of twist it so that my trigger's in the right spot. It's going to be left of center, because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you put it so it's triggers on the right side. But that's good. Now I set a 5-minute timer and let that dry. Almost forgot to put the Delin rod on. So glad I remembered that. So now I'm gonna have to wipe the epoxy off everything because we need to quick slip that rod on. And quick pull this, make this dry, because this, I forgot to put the Delin piece in. Lovely. Thread this through here. Put that back in the spine. Then the handle goes on. All right. Whew, good thing I remembered that. Ooh, and I want my rod handle. Yeah, that's about right. About 1/2 inch. I like a 1/2 inch gap right around there. So my thumb is in a convenient spot. So let that dry for 5. Now that we've got this all epoxy together, we're gonna tack the poly line to the base of the rod here, just to stabilize it a little bit better. I'm using gaffer tape because it's Puppet Builder's friend, but if you don't happen to have that, you could use just whatever tape you have handy. Now your poly line is gonna, or Teflon tubing is gonna veer left if you're right-handed, because the trigger's on the left. And this slidey thing is kind of in the way. So you're gonna have to angle the placement of your trigger so it's kind of like this from side view. Because if you put it like this, it interferes. If you put it too far down, it's not in the spot where your forefinger can catch it. So it needs to be kind of right here, very specifically right there. So we're going to tie it off with that in mind. And also with in mind that at neutral, with the jaw closed, it needs to be there. So we're just going to tack it in place. Or go through the hole, go around a couple times around the trigger. We're going to tack it with a little piece of tape, test it. If it's spot on where we want it and nothing's interfering, then we can tack it down permanently. So I'll test the function of the mouth. Good springy action. If anything, with the heads all the way up, it hits a little bit. Which means I could sand off this edge right here to prevent that from happening. So I might get my Dremel. Okay, I think that's good. That's head neutral. I might like it a little bit tighter. Oops, but not much. Okay. So now I can tape it in place. I might wrap it a few more times around the trigger and then tape it. And the length of this line can be shortened just a little bit too. And then you don't have to wrap it quite as much. But I think the idea is if there were a break somewhere, there's enough line to tighten, loosen, retie, whatever, the whole thing. But this puppet is so simple that even redoing the whole thing is not that bad because almost everything is visible, easily repaired from the outside. So I'm going to trim off this little piece of line here. Okay. So once you've got that Dacron line tied in place, give it one more try. Make sure nothing's interfering. Check there's a good snap back on the jaw. This is ready to go. There's a few amendments you can make it to make it a little bit better. One is the fact that if the jaw closes and snaps against the top jaw, it can make a little bit of a noise. And so one thing I did to buffer the noise is put a little tiny piece of velvet in the top of the mouth. So it just so happens I have a box full of pupils that I normally use for Muppety puppets, and we're just going to take one of those pupils and cut it down to create a bumper in the mouth. So if I just cut out kind of like a moon shape, that little section is probably all I need. In the sky, the hole is so close to the edge, it needs to be just even tinier. So try that. Well, the other thing from an aesthetic standpoint, I might actually Dremel down or sand down these little points right here, which kind of look like teeth. And I might put a spot of paint there too so they don't show up as much. Joints can also be made a little bit more flexible. So like right now, he doesn't have very good articulation. So what I did on Bones is to actually pull the arm off. And you'll actually snap off the joint here, but then you can drill a hole through here and also through the shoulder blade, and then use some elastic string to make it so that it can pop out of the joint a little bit, and then you can get his arm to go out a little bit farther. So I'm going to do that on both of these arms, where I'm going to drill the holes out at the shoulder blade and in through the arms, and then we'll get better articulation there. At this point, you can actually sit him up on his stand too, and it's easier to work on him. I'm going to drill through his little arm bones. And through his shoulder blade. Then I use the same black cording to thread everything back together as I used on the neck. I'm tying enough knots that hopefully this will stay in place. And then what I did with Bones is, even though the knot was big, sometimes stress on the arm would pop the knot through, so I put a little hot glue on these sections. But now get a little bit more movement in the arm. Another thing that's kind of fun to do is hit the fingers with a heat gun, and then you can curl them a little bit. Actually, they might curl on their own. But if you heat them up, that helps too. And then it looks a little more natural. So I'd repeat that. If you can repeat that same thing with his other arm. You can also modify other joints too, like elbows or whatever. And it depends on the action that you want your puppet to do. So for Bones, I wanted him to be able to lift a cup of coffee, so I needed more joint movement here. I also needed more flexion or movement here to get the coffee cup closer to his head. So you can either bend the bones or restrict this or make this joint fold a little bit more to do that. So, and then I did arm rods through the elbows on him. I only wanted one arm to do the work. And so what I did is I sent his arm rod through the back of his humerus, I believe this is. And I can move his arm on screen just a little bit. But I want to show you the mouth action a little bit first before we go. Nice good snap. And then this head movement, we've got looking up, looking down, left and right. And all of that is done with thumb and forefinger. So from the side, you see here, I have access to the trigger with my forefinger, and the thumb, it gets you all the different head movement depending on how you move the block, which is why that thumb rest is a little handy. It helps you grip the little Delin block a little bit better. That's it.
Thanks for the pal, Pam. Stein and I are planning world domination.
Yes, swift and powerful.
What?
She's so gullible. Let's go play with Grogu.
Who's Grogu? Is this what you had in mind, Bones?
It is not.
Interested in making your own Grogu mechanical puppet? I've got plans for that too. Visit my website and see for the schematics on there, and there's a tutorial for how to make him on YouTube.